In the world of institutional finance, we are often told that centralization is the ultimate guarantor of security. We surrender our data to massive, monolithic entities under the assumption that their scale creates an impenetrable fortress. However, as reported recently by Bloomberg, the reality is far more fragile. When the FBI is called in to assess a major hack of a real estate finance tech vendor, a pillar of the modern property market, the facade of centralized safety begins to crack. If the ledgers of our homes and our debts are this vulnerable to systemic failure, we must ask a more profound question. What about the ledger of our collective human knowledge? For decades, we have allowed the most vital scientific breakthroughs, the data that could cure our diseases and extend our lives, to be stored in the same kind of siloed, opaque, and vulnerable centralized systems. We are currently witnessing a crisis of provenance and security in how we handle our species' intellectual property. This isn't just about a hack in the real estate sector. It is a warning shot for the entire architecture of how we fund and protect discovery. Today, we are going to look beyond the noise of the markets to examine a fundamental re-architecting of science itself. This is Decentralized Science, or DeSci. It is an analytical transition from a world of gatekeepers to a world of sovereign research. To understand the depth of this blind spot, we must look at the data, specifically a recent analysis from Bloomberg. The findings are sobering. In recent earnings seasons, the term artificial intelligence has become a mandatory buzzword for CEOs across every sector. From consumer staples to heavy industry, executives are peppered with questions about their AI strategy, and they are quick to offer reassuring, if vague, platitudes. However, Bloomberg's data reveals a startling mention gap. While the mention of AI in earnings calls is skyrocketing, up triple digits in some sectors, the actual capital expenditure, or CapEx, dedicated to AI infrastructure in the broader S&P 500 is remaining remarkably stagnant. We are witnessing a performance of innovation rather than the practice of it. For the mature investor, this should be a red flag. It suggests that while the tech giants are spending billions to build the tools, the companies that are supposed to use those tools to find efficiencies, your banks, your logistics providers, your healthcare networks, are largely standing on the sidelines. They are talking the talk to please the analysts, but they are not yet walking the walk. This lack of investment suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of the stakes. In an era where AI is expected to redefine margins and labor productivity, a company that refuses to put its capital where its mouth is a company that is effectively managing its own decline. We have to ask, if the hot topic isn't translating into balance sheet action, is it truly an evolution, or just a marketing strategy designed to keep share prices afloat in a volatile market? Let's move past the buzzwords of Web3 and focus on the mechanics. In a decentralized science framework, two primary pillars replace the old gatekeepers, IP-NFTs and bio-DAOs. For the intellectually honest investor, an IP-NFT, intellectual property non-fungible token, is not a digital art piece. It is a legal and technical wrapper for a patent or a research finding. It allows a scientist to take their discovery and place it on a distributed ledger. This ensures that the provenance of the research is immutable and that the ownership is clear, transparent, and divisible. This leads us to the bio-DAO. Imagine a decentralized autonomous organization, a collective of scientists, patients, and investors who pool their capital to fund specific areas of research, such as longevity or rare diseases. Instead of waiting for a legacy bank or a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate to greenlight a project, the bio-DAO provides peer-to-peer funding. This creates a sovereign environment where the community that cares most about the science is the one that owns the IP. It eliminates the black box problem we see in traditional finance tech. By using distributed ledgers, we ensure that scientific data cannot be siloed or easily manipulated, providing a layer of security that the centralized vendors mentioned in the Bloomberg report simply cannot match by design. To appreciate the magnitude of this change, we have to look back at how we got here. The current model of scientific funding didn't descend from the heavens. It was a policy choice made in 1945. Vannevar Bush, then the director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, penned a report titled Science, the Endless Frontier. This became the blueprint for the post-World War II era, establishing the National Science Foundation and the peer review system we use today. For 70 years, this model was the engine of progress. It was built for a world of physical libraries, slow mail, and centralized government control. But today, those 70-year-old systems are cracking under the weight of their own sclerotic bureaucracy. The peer review process has become a bottleneck, often stifling innovation in favor of consensus. Researchers spend up to 40% of their time writing grants rather than doing science. We are operating 21st century biotech on a 1940s operating system. The Bloomberg-reported vulnerabilities in our financial infrastructure are symptoms of a larger disease: the failure of centralized legacy systems to keep pace with the digital age. DeSci is the first serious attempt to modernize the Bush report's vision, to move science from a government-controlled, endless frontier to a community-governed digital frontier. It is a necessary evolution for a civilization that intends to keep moving forward. We often operate under the illusion that centralization equals security. We assume that because a massive institution holds our data, it is protected by an impenetrable fortress. But the reality is far more sobering. Recently, Bloomberg reported on a significant security breach where banks and the FBI were forced to assess a hack of a major real estate finance tech vendor. This wasn't just a minor leak. It was a systemic failure of a centralized black box. When a single vendor or a single database acts as the gatekeeper for trillions of dollars in assets, it becomes the ultimate single point of failure. Now, apply this vulnerability to the world of scientific research. Today, our collective human knowledge, the blueprints for new medicines, the data from clinical trials, the foundational IP of our future, is stored in similarly opaque centralized silos. If a real estate vendor can be compromised, so can the institutions holding the keys to our biological future. This is where the structural argument for decentralized science, or DeSci, becomes undeniable. In a DeSci framework, we move away from the black box model. Instead of relying on the perceived strength of a single wall, we rely on the mathematical certainty of a distributed ledger. Research data isn't just stored. It is hashed, time-stamped, and made immutable. If we look at the Bloomberg report as a cautionary tale, we see that the traditional model of trust is failing. We have been outsourcing our trust to intermediaries who, as it turns out, are often thinner than they appear. DeSci proposes a system where the proof is in the architecture itself. By using decentralized protocols, we ensure that scientific discovery is transparent, verifiable, and, most importantly, resistant to the kind of systemic collapses we are currently seeing in the centralized tech sector. It is a transition from trusting an institution to verifying the data, a shift that is as much about security as it is about progress. For the mature investor, those of us who have moved past the volatility of quick gains and are now focused on legacy and long-term sustainability, the most compelling frontier in DeSci is geroscience, or aging research. In the traditional pharmaceutical model, aging is not classified as a disease by the FDA, which means funding for true longevity research is notoriously difficult to secure. This is the valley of death in action. Brilliant scientists are forced to pivot toward treating symptoms of late-stage diseases rather than addressing the underlying biological drivers of aging, because that's where the centralized funding flows. DeSci fundamentally reconfigures the economics of this pursuit. Through the use of bio-DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations focused on biotechnology, we are seeing a democratization of intellectual property. For example, organizations like VitaDAO allow individuals to contribute capital or work in exchange for governance tokens that represent an interest in a portfolio of longevity IP. This isn't buying a stock. This is participating in the fractionalized ownership of the future of medicine. For an audience that understands the value of time, the ROI here isn't just measured in a percentage return, but in the acceleration of technologies that could extend the human health span. By removing the middleman, the large pharma conglomerates, and the rigid grant funding bodies, DeSci allows for a more direct pipeline between capital and breakthrough. It turns the quest for longevity from a speculative philanthropic endeavor into a structured, community-owned asset class. We are no longer just waiting for the future to happen to us. We are funding the infrastructure to build it. As an informed peer, I would be remiss if I didn't address the significant hurdles. To view DeSci through a purely optimistic lens would be intellectually dishonest. The path ahead is fraught with regulatory and structural challenges. First, there is the regulatory horizon. The FDA and other global bodies are built to interact with centralized corporate entities, not decentralized collectives. How does a bio-DAO file for an investigational new drug application? How does a legal system designed in the 20th century handle IP-NFTs? These are not small questions. They are the friction points that will define the next decade. Furthermore, we must consider the risk of bad science. In a decentralized environment, the gatekeepers are gone, but so is the traditional peer review filter. While the current peer review system is flawed and often slow, it provides a baseline of credibility. DeSci must develop its own robust, decentralized reputation systems to ensure that we aren't just funding the loudest voices in the room, but the most rigorous ones. There is also the matter of legal wrappers. A DAO, in its purest code form, has no standing in most courts of law. This creates a liminal space where the technology has outpaced the statute. For the investor, this means the risk profile is high. We are currently in the pioneer phase, where the foundations are being poured but the building hasn't been inspected. It requires a sober assessment. DeSci is a structural solution to a systemic problem, but the transition will be messy, litigious, and likely involve several high-profile failures before the model is perfected. When we look toward the 10-year horizon, decentralized science reveals itself as an analytical evergreen. It is not a trend that will dissipate with the next market cycle because the problems it solves, the fragility of data, the inefficiency of funding, and the gatekeeping of knowledge, are permanent features of our current civilization. As we have seen from the Bloomberg reports on centralized technical vulnerabilities, the old ways of securing our most precious assets are no longer sufficient. We need a system that is as resilient as the knowledge it seeks to protect. DeSci is not a gamble on a new type of coin. It is a fundamental re-architecting of how humanity discovers, verifies, and owns its greatest breakthroughs. For the man over 40, looking to position himself not just for wealth, but for a future worth living in, DeSci represents a rare opportunity to move from a passive consumer of progress to an active participant in it. It is a shift from the endless frontier of government-led expansion to the digital frontier of community-governed discovery. In our next deep dive, we will continue to examine the structures that underpin our world, always seeking the signal through the noise. This is the path toward a more sober, more rational, and more sustainable future. This is the horizon. Thank you for your time.